Well, hello again and welcome to Rare Classic Cars on the weekend. And of course in the Midwest here, I did the Pontiac review and then a day later we've got snow on the ground here and it's back to being cold and the salt is back out on the roadways, so. But that's okay. We have more videos and porch chats and things to talk about. And today I want to talk about a vehicle that really has a special place in my heart because it was the first classic vehicle that I ever bought. And that's the 1976 to 1979 Cadillac Seville. Really a car that set the tone for design in American vehicles from that point forward until the Ford Taurus, really, with this, what was called the sheer look. And there's some debate about what the sheer look means. Some say that it refers to the sheer edge of a cliff. Some say it refers to the sheer nylons and stockings that women wore at the time. I don't know, but that's what it was called by GM at the time. In any event, I had one. I had a 79 Cadillac Seville diesel. That was the first car that I bought with my own money. And I think I paid $1,600 for it back then. And it was in beautiful condition. It was like a graphite silver color with a similarly colored padded roof and a gray leather interior. And I loved that car. I really did love that car. It had no power, none. It was, I think, 120 horsepower and the car weighed 4,300 pounds. So it was about 18 seconds, 0 to 60, give or take. If you drove it normally, it was just fine. But if you pushed on the accelerator and floored it to pass anybody, I mean, you just had no additional power. It did nothing more than serve as a noisemaker. I mean, at two-lane roads, I remember having to drop back, and then I would gun it in advance of being able to pass somebody on the two-lane road. That's how bad it was. Slowest car I've ever owned. You purposely went in and out of traffic and exploited its best handling so that you didn't have to hit the brake pedal and then regain your momentum and speed over the course of the next couple miles. But in spite of that, I loved that car. It was comfortable, it was quiet. Inside, I mean, you didn't get the diesel racket really inside. A little bit when it was cold and the diesel was noisier. But you didn't hear anything when you were cruising inside. They had a lot of sound deadening in that car. And in spite, as I said, of it being slow, it was just a fun car. It really was. It was my first experience with hydro boost brakes because diesels don't have vacuum. There's no throttle plate. So I learned a bit about that. And it always started for me, even in 0-degree weather. I didn't have any of those problems that others did, I suspect, because the car was relatively high mileage at the time. I think it had maybe 85,000 miles on it. It was in really nice shape, but it was not a low mileage car. So I guess the bugs had been sorted out. Started for me just fine, and it always returned on the freeway, I would say high 20s in terms of miles per gallon. It was really that good on fuel mileage. And I didn't drive much around town at that time, so I don't know what the in-town mileage was. But I just remember being amazed at the on the freeway mileage. It really was, like I said, that good. So for somebody who was 16 years old, didn't have a great budget when it came to cars, it was fuel efficient, it looked cool, and it was fun. You know, what more was there to have? And I enjoyed it. It really didn't give me too many problems. So I did also have a factory CB radio in it, which was the coolest thing at the time because there really weren't, you could get a radar detector, but those were really expensive. There was no such thing as Waze or GPS that flagged where the cops were for you at that time. But this was like an early radar, if you will, because you just turned the CB radio on to one of the, I think it was 40 channels, something like that. And you'd hear the truckers talking about cops up ahead. So it was just an all-around fun car. My friends in high school loved it, and I enjoyed it. And I sold it a number of years back just because I had moved on and I became a low-mileage snob. Maybe I shouldn't have sold it, but I did. And just like other cars that we kind of regret selling a little bit, maybe that's one that I miss a little bit in my heart. But in any event, watch this video on the 76 to 79 Seville and the history. I'm thinking of, I would say, renaming the channel Rare Classic Cars in Automotive History because it seems like a lot of us like to talk about automotive history. I started the car really started this channel because of rare classic cars, or cars that I thought were rare classic cars I wanted to talk about, but we still talk about those, and we talk about different topics too that everyone seems to enjoy. So maybe I'll do that. Let me know your thoughts, and let me know your thoughts in the video. Make sure you like and subscribe if you enjoy this, and if you're new to the channel, welcome, and enjoy this video vignette on the 76 to 79 Cadillac Seville, and wait for a picture of yours truly. It is in this video when I was 16. Thanks again, and take care.
Well, let's turn our eye back to the halcyon days of Cadillac. In 1975, as it was about to introduce a new kind of luxury car in an era where before this, bigger was almost always better. That mantra became significantly challenged in the shadow of the 1973 to 74 OPEC oil embargo, and Cadillac dealers were clamoring for something other than the 472 cubic inch or 500 cubic inch V8 behemoths that were parked on their lots. Thus, roughly 18 months prior to launch in 1975 as a 1976 model, the 1976 to 1979 Seville was birthed and began its gestation. Until this point, downsizing had largely been anathema to American car makers, although there were a few examples of downsizing, including a recent one, the Mustang II, based on the Pinto, which represented a downsized Mustang, and did so quite successfully, at least from a sales standpoint. However, Cadillac and luxury car manufacturers had not tried this philosophy, and so eschewing size while increasing price was something that was unique to Seville and highly controversial, certainly within the corporation, if not also with potential buyers. However, in 1974, GM had new leadership at the helm, with Pete Estes taking over as president and Tom Murphy taking over as chairman, both of whom were advocates of downsizing. And a number of downsizing studies had already begun at Cadillac in the early 70s under general manager George Algis as well as Bob Lund. Most of the Seville's gestation thus took place under Bob Lund. However, he left to become general manager of Chevrolet in late 1974, and Ed Kennard took over the helm at Cadillac, also becoming the person who is most associated with the Seville sales success from a general management standpoint. Bob Templin would be Cadillac's chief engineer, whose team was in charge of the Seville's development. While radical for Cadillac, most of GM's other divisions had small or medium-sized cars. Chevrolet had the Vega, Nova, and Chevelle. Pontiac had the Astra, Ventura, and Le Mans. Olds Buick also had their versions of medium-sized or intermediate cars as well. However, the prevailing thought among general management at the time was that Cadillac had no business being in the small car business, until some early downsizing studies that were performed in the early 70s revealed that a number of buyers might actually be interested in such a car, most particularly women. The OPEC embargo further fueled the fire and incentivized Cadillac to develop a Seville to meet clamoring dealers who wanted something smaller that was still luxurious. At first, Bob Templin's team turned to Europe and Opel, where they thought that they could potentially use a reskinned Diplomat to make into a Seville. However, they soon learned that Fisher Body rejected the idea because Opel apparently used, humorously, tighter tolerances and longer flanges, things that just wouldn't do in Fisher Body's U.S. production system. So another body shell had to be found, and that came in the form of the Nova. It is hard to believe, but Cadillac's most expensive car to be launched in 1976 would have these humble beginnings from the Chevy Nova, and yet a lot of work was done to the overall X car, as it was known, chassis, so much so that it got its own designation, the K car. The original test mules for the Seville were outfitted with Oldsmobile's 350 cubic inch V8, but the Eldorado's front-wheel drive transaxle, and thus were front-engine, front-wheel drive vehicles. However, after it was determined that the Nova's 111-inch wheelbase was not quite sufficient to deliver the rear legroom that customers desired, the Nova's platform was stretched to a 114.3-inch wheelbase, and a decision was made to switch the car to front-engine rear-wheel drive, largely because of capacity issues related to the front-wheel drive transaxle. Once that decision had been made, Cadillac engineers went to work trying to tame the Nova's relatively crude underpinnings, and they used some techniques that were very novel at the time, including what was called fast Fourier analysis, really just a fancy term for mathematical modeling that enabled engineers to better understand harmonics, sounds, and the bending and torsion of various parts of the body structure. And this analysis really did wonders to what was the Nova's underpinnings. Having owned a 1979 Seville for a number of years and being even a diesel variant, I can attest to the fact that the chassis was never something that was discernibly flexible to me, nor did it create a lot of creaks or groans or rattles or allow for significant noise intrusion to the cabin. In fact, the Seville was anything but. It was a very quiet place to be with a relatively stiff ride, especially by the time for a Cadillac, but not so much that it was intrusive. In brief, the fast Fourier analysis and other engineering techniques really did work and helped turn a sow's ear into a silk purse over a 14-month period between which the Seville was officially commissioned and the first vehicle rolled off the production line. While the engineers had their challenges, so did the design team. This design team was headed by Stan Weiland, and Stan really struggled with finding a theme for the car until Bill Mitchell, according to him, had a rather testy exchange in which he was expressed frustration about not yet having a theme for the Seville. Stan remarked that he just didn't understand what Bill was expecting from this vehicle, to which Bill allegedly said, "If I don't smell garlic in the hallway when I come back, I know you don't have it." This gave Stan and his team an idea to have more of an Italian-themed auto, and they started roughing in some various sketches related to that. Soon thereafter, design work on the Seville was transferred to Cadillac's Advanced Studio, which was headed by Wayne Cady at the time, because the production studios couldn't handle all the workload for this new vehicle. Wayne's team went to work on a semi-fastback design that was certainly unique for the time period. But Wayne's leadership over the design would soon be short-lived, as he would be transferred to the Buick studios as styling chief there. Stan Parker then took over the Cadillac Advanced Studios and put together a proposal of his own with a stretched rear door proportion and a vertical backlight that was directed by Bill Mitchell after he had come back from a visit to England and declared that he wanted a Rolls-Royce style backlight on the vehicle. In the end, two design proposals were clinicked, one with the semi-fastback design that was pioneered by Wayne Cady, and one with the more formal roofline that was part of Stan Parker's proposal. The marketing groups picked the latter, and thus the die was cast for the Seville's overall styling theme. This styling theme, nicknamed the sheer look within General Motors, not only set the standard for Seville, but also for many other General Motors cars, including the 1977 Caprice and Impala, as well as many subsequent generation GM vehicles, as well as other vehicles made by other automakers, to that point arguably including the Ford Panther platforms and some of the R-body Chryslers that came out in the later 70s. When all was said and done, the Seville ended up 27 inches shorter, 8 inches narrower, and about 1,000 pounds lighter than a 1975 DeVille, although it still weighed in at almost 4,300 pounds despite its relatively small size. Under hood, the Seville ended up with Oldsmobile's 350 cubic inch V8 outfitted with Bendix electronic fuel injection, as previously mentioned, the first instance of electronic fuel injection in General Motors cars. The system was relatively reliable, although there were some early ECU failures that prompted Bendix and GM to add in redundant circuitry for limp home modes. The Olds V8 made 180 horsepower in this form, about 10 more than a 4-barrel topped Olds 350 V8, and it did so smoothly and reliably. Inside, Cadillac interior designers made the typical Cadillac buyer feel at home in the Seville, with overstuffed seats and a very Cadillac-looking instrument panel. And despite the fact that this was supposed to be a Mercedes and European car competitor, the instrument panel only sported 2 gauges, a speedometer and a fuel gauge. No oil pressure gauge or temperature gauge or anything else was included aside from a few idiot lights. And while the Seville's wheelbase had been stretched versus the Nova's, it really didn't have all that much interior room, in part due to the fact that the seats were so overstuffed. And having driven one of these vehicles, I can say that being 6'1", it wasn't all that comfortable sitting in the driver's chair. You sit very, very high, and the footwell area is not that wide, with your left foot almost resting on the bright light dimmer button. But if I were a buyer in the time, I would have put up with these small little niggles in exchange for looking stylish and having what was genuinely a quiet and pleasant vehicle. Well, at least in stock form in 1976 and 1977. As the Seville aged over its lifetime, there were some positive as well as negative developments, if you will. In 1977, it traded its rear drum brakes for rear disc brakes, the grille texture changed to fine vertical bars, and 2 wheel covers were added, a turbine vane style as well as the faux wire wheel covers. 1978 saw some more fundamental changes, including the addition of an Elegante trim, which had no padded vinyl roof and was offered in 2 colors, sable black over platinum or western saddle fire mist over ruidoso brown. The Elegante also came with a unique interior with perforated leather, a leather wheel, as well as a center console with a writing tablet. Unfortunately, 1978 also saw the introduction of the Oldsmobile 350 cubic inch diesel to the Seville, a $2,200 option that some buyers checked off, and interestingly, Car and Driver editor David E. Davis Jr. proclaimed to be a diesel that would change Americans' opinions of diesels. I don't think he really understood how telling his comments would later become. A funky and cool trip computer was also introduced in 1978. It was a quite expensive option, as well as a digital instrument cluster. In 1979, there were relatively minor changes to the Seville, one being that the interior wood trim switched to now a more faux burl walnut look. But aside from that, it largely remained the same. Over the course of the Seville's lifetime, the sales figures would chart one of success, starting at about 35,000 units of sales in calendar year 1975, topping out at about 59,000 in 1978 before dropping down into the high 40,000s in 1979. But these were extremely high sales figures for a very expensive car. When the Seville was launched in 1976, it carried a base price of $12,479. By comparison, a 1976 Eldorado convertible retailed for a base price of $11,049, and a Cadillac Sedan DeVille's retail base price was $9,265. So it was more than a $3,000 premium over a DeVille and about a $1,500 premium over an Eldorado convertible. However, as mentioned, the price certainly didn't keep buyers away, and the first-generation Seville went into the history books not only as a very successful car from a sales standpoint, but as a seminal vehicle that set the tone for General Motors and indeed automotive design in general for many years to come, perhaps until Ford introduced the Taurus and the Sable in 1986. As the Seville was winding down its life cycle, Wayne Cady transferred back into Cadillac Studios and began work on the next generation Seville, which would be the famous bustleback design. All in all, Cadillac 76 to 1979 Seville is a significant piece of automotive history, and as I mentioned, having owned one, they are very, very pleasant cars to drive, although the interior roominess, particularly if you're tall, is not all that great. The trunk space is, I would call it somewhat smallish, about 14 cubic feet. In fact, the bustleback's trunk has more usable trunk space than the previous generation Seville, but nonetheless, it really is an enjoyable car to drive and certainly a looker, especially by my eye in dark colors as well as graphite silver. Hope you enjoyed this review of the 1976 to 1979 Cadillac Seville. Thanks again for watching. Thanks again for watching this review of the 1976 to 79 Seville. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to click the like button and comment, as that helps the YouTube algorithm serve this video up to more viewers like you. And if you're new to Rare Classic Cars, welcome. We enjoy reviewing vehicles like this that are not as talked about as some of the muscle cars, but hopefully you enjoy the discussion. Take a look at some of the video thumbnails at the bottom left and right for videos served up for you. And if you haven't yet subscribed, hit the circular icon of the 67 Buick Riviera at the top left, and then hit the bell to ensure you're notified of all my future videos. Thanks again for watching, and take care.